we've tried to do here is really open up some time for advisory group questions, comments, discussion, etc. And Cody, if you could forward to the agenda outline, thank you. Oops, there we go. We're going to talk a little bit about the working groups that were proposed at the sort of the conclusion of the last meeting on January 13th. And we are going to talk a little bit about relating to the historically economically disadvantaged communities. We're going to talk a little bit about the income qualification guidelines for DHCD programs, both weatherization and affordable and special needs housing. Willie Fobbs is going to come online for that portion of the discussion to be a resource and kind of walk us through some of the nuances of that. And then we're going to turn it back over to the advisory group for discussion. We are going to do a brief public comment period. I'm not aware that no one's reached out to me with, the desire to provide public comments, but we'll open it up and certainly anyone is welcome to do so. Then Cindy Davis with our Building Fire Regulations Codes team is going to give a brief presentation on the 2018 Virginia Energy Code updates. And that will be sort of an opportunity for a baseline discussion around additional energy efficiency requirements that we may be requiring for new construction projects or substantial renovations to access additional funding through the Housing Innovations and Energy Efficiency Program. And then we're going to close the discussion and I think try today to elicit some feedback and maybe get some consensus around some recommendations in terms of, where's the advisory group aligning? Do we have consensus or broad agreement on some of these issues and some things that we can kind of summarize in preparation for our next meeting, which would be late February. Schedule TBD, and I'll do the same thing that I did for these 2 January meetings is send out a Google poll to you all to see when, when we can, what's the best time for us to convene. So let's see. Does anybody from DHCD want to jump in? And I should also mention that Stephanie Flanders from Virginia Housing is on the line. Good morning. And Tony Ostrowski from Virginia Housing is also joining us. So they will be good resources and subject matter experts if we have questions regarding low-income housing tax credits or things of that nature. So I think we can move along to the next slide, Cody. So again, just refreshing this tentative timeline for the program development. We're now in the second of 2 advisory group meetings for January. We are intending to summarize the information that we get with these 2 meetings and try to prepare a straw proposal for you all to consider for the February meeting. That would be a draft allocation of percentages within the different program buckets that we propose to you. And we'll review those again as well here. Mid-March, we will at that point have an opportunity to review the auction results from the March 2nd Reggie auction, which will be the first auction that Virginia compliance entities are participating in. And so at that point in time, we'll be able to get a good read on what the market price is doing, what sort of revenues we may expect, or we may be able to predict a little more accurately based on that first data point from the first auction. And then we'll try to wrap this up and provide recommendations to the governor's office and the Secretary of Commerce and Trade's office for their review. That will sort of be conveyed by our leadership team, and there will be, I'm sure, some conversation about that. But the idea is we want to have the advisory group, in consensus or at least in broad agreement in terms of what we're proposing here. And then by mid-April, we would hope that we'll have program-specific guidelines or draft guidelines ready for review and discussion amongst the advisory group. Um, so I'm going to move along in the interest of time. Last time on January 13th, we provided a straw proposal around these primary funding buckets for the HIEE or RGGI dollars. We were proposing that we would invest a portion in the affordable and special needs housing program to serve additional houses and increase the energy efficiency and health and safety requirements for those projects. Again, we've talked quite a bit about the weatherization assistance program, and I think there's broad support. What we heard last time was there was broad support for investments in addressing deferrals so that the homes that are deferred due to incidental repairs that are needed that are not allowing them to access weatherization services, that there would be high value in investing some of this money in getting those repairs done so that these households can be served by the weatherization program and get those energy efficiency services. And then the third bucket we proposed that was obviously not as fully formed because it's a new proposal, but we're proposing a housing innovation partnerships grant program that would foster innovative and scalable solutions to increase access to energy efficient, affordable housing in the Commonwealth, which is a pretty big bucket. Obviously, we've got to put pen to paper and I think really provide you all with a little bit more detailed proposal in terms of what we think should be prioritized, and then also get your feedback on what you think should be prioritized within that sort of in sort of under that umbrella. All right, and I'm racing right along here because I do want to get to the discussion portion and flip the classroom here so that we can hear from you. But we discussed last time a couple of working groups, and I think Carmen originally proposed this idea back in our first meeting in December. And I think that given the size of the group, given the interest, that it would make sense to propose a couple of working groups, and one focused on historically economically disadvantaged communities, and making sure that we have tools and resources to understand how we can identify or target and serve these communities well. And so I will say that I've reached out to a couple of folks, and I've have some volunteers, and I think we could use a couple more volunteers to serve on this group. And if anybody feels strongly about this, please reach out to me, and we can go from there. And then in terms of the affordable and special needs housing working group, I think that we've got pretty good representation on that group at this point in time. I've reached out to a number of you, and I've gotten a confirm and interest from everyone, so I really appreciate that. And what I would propose is that we will convene the working groups in early to mid-February and sort of develop recommendations and bring those back to the full advisory group for late February's meeting. So I think that will give the smaller groups an opportunity to put some recommendations together, have some more detailed conversation, and then bring those recommendations back to the larger group for review. So we wanted to bring forward the definition of historically economically disadvantaged communities, which resides in the Virginia Clean Economy Act, and you can see that definition there. There's some linkages here, and this is kind of the purpose of this slide, is to show that there's a lot of linkages within the code and the various clean energy legislation that has passed during the 2020 session, and so one of those linkages is to the Community Flood Preparedness Fund. There is a reference to low-income geographic area, and that is the portion of the RGGI funds that are designated to the revolving loan fund that will be developed by Department of Conservation and Recreation and administered by Virginia Resources Authority. to assist local governments with resiliency planning and infrastructure projects that are needed to deal with issues of flooding, persistent flooding and sea level rise, and those types of impacts that are impending because of climate change and because of global warming. And in the affordable and special needs housing program, there are, generally speaking, targeted to low income populations. And this is where I think on the next couple of slides, I'm going to ask Willie to jump in here and kind of walk us through this and in terms of how low income is defined across DHCD's suite of programs. And then I think we can, and then from there we can sort of segue into conversation. So, Willie, are you on the line with us?
I am, and I apologize. I've had computer issues this morning, but yes, I am.
All right, wonderful. Thank you. I'll turn it over to you. And I think we got a slide queued up. Yep.
Okay. So good morning, all. Again, I apologize for joining late. What we wanted to do is talk a little bit about how we feel like we're in a position to meet some of the objectives I know Dan has already covered related to our meeting the requirements for economically distressed compliance with the provisions under RGGI. And so I want to talk a little bit about, on the next couple of slides, really just to talk about income qualification and to give you a sense of how the programs that are already in play that we intend to couple these funds with are addressing that requirement. So you all have heard me talk last time around about the weatherization assistance program. Some key things just to point out is the weatherization program under its federal statute, which is the 10 CFR 440, identifies that the program is targeted at incomes and families who meet the 20% or below of federal poverty limit. And so that's what the program operates under. The statute also gives the state grantees the ability to, if they choose to, and we have to do an annual state plan to allow to do this, to use the state median income guideline, which is determined by the HIEE program. So under the DOE statute, it says that states can either run it under the federal poverty limit guideline, or we can choose to do it under the state median income. And so that decision was made with some back and forth and analysis that the SMI, the state median income, provided a broader net that we could bring folks in under the program. So what you see there on your screen is the state median income for a family of four for 2020 was at $62,791. And just for comparison purposes, the income for a family of four under the 200% of poverty was actually $52,400. So you can see we got about a $10,000 spread there in household income that allows us to reach additional folks. And so the scale that we put in the state plan is actually just, this is just probably more information than you need, but for family size up to 7, the state median income exceeds 200% of poverty. When you get to a family size of 8 or more, the 200% poverty level actually then exceeds the SMI. So our state plan is written that we can use that we elected to use the SMI up to family size of 7. You get above that, we can switch over to the federal poverty limit. So again, approaching the whole thing with the objective of trying to figure out how can we serve as many households as we can under the program. The other part of the 1040 is that it sets out a prioritization for the federally funded weatherization assistance program. Is focused on families that have at least one elderly person. And I should have looked this up, but I think elderly under this definition is, I don't want to misspeak, but I feel like it's probably 55. I can't don't hold me to that. I'd have to look that up. But families with the elderly person, person in the household with a disability, families with children. And so also, so you know, under the federal definition of weatherization, child is up to age 17. And then it has two other additional provisions that we have not traditionally been able to assess because of, you know, the lack of access to utility records and that types of things. But it talks about also high residential energy users and households with the high energy burden. And that is where we feel like this RGGI component is going to allow us to expand our ability to then further define those two categories. So the other piece is just in general that an eligible dwelling unit under the federal definition is one that meets the income qualification first of all, and then has a member who has received cash assistance payments under Title IV or Title VI, I think, of the Social Security Act. So that automatically makes him eligible for the federally funded weatherization. And so I wanted to make sure you had a sense of that, and I certainly willing to answer any questions related to that. The other component of the incorporation with the affordable and special needs housing, I wanted to, I know we put this slide up, I think probably with the first meeting, but just to give you a sense of the spectrum of the income targeting that's combined under the affordable and special needs housing program. You may recall, we combined 4 agency resources under this program. Each program has its own statutory maximum AMI. And so under the state trust fund, that can fund projects up to 80% AMI. And again, that's kind of the universal standard we know for broadly statewide for at a minimum being considered low-income household. The federal home program allows for 80% if we fund home buyer activity or if it's invested in home buyer activity, and 60% if it's for any rental activity. And then the National Trust Fund, that is focused on extremely low income, that is 30% AMI. And so that is that resource, obviously, typically we're combining that with properties that have some other sort of rental assistance, but and then the PSH requirement is also 30% AMI. So the one key thing I want to kind of point out, even though the trust fund has that 80% component and the home allows up to 80%, that's pretty much universally applied in a home ownership situation. Most, if not all, I guess all of our rental is going to be restricted to that, excuse me, that 60% or below. Now, the other key component is that, I think we talked about this again in that first meeting, is that about 85 to 90% of what we fund on the multifamily side, primarily because of our investment caps, is combined with LATEC funding. And so in that situation, all of our funding, regardless of the source, has to meet the LATEC requirements, which are the 60% of the units at 60% and 40 at 50, I think is how it's broken down. So in 90% of what we're investing in, it is going to be a 60% AMI through the affordable and special needs housing. And as I mentioned, only in the situations of home ownership investment are we looking at going up to 80%. So those are the key things we wanted to, and Dan, I apologize one more time there. So I don't know how much you had covered before that, but those are the key things that I wanted to make sure that we had outlined for you in terms of how investment in these two existing programs. And Nancy corrected me, the elderly for weatherization is 60% old, or 60 years of age or older, not 55. I apologize for that. And so wanted to, make sure that I covered what tied into what you had covered earlier, and certainly I'm here to answer any questions you might have.
That's great. Thank you, Willie. Any questions for Willie on this related to income guidelines? All right. Well, I think we're just, on behalf of the DHCD team, we want to thank you all. And we're not holding anything back on you here. We've got the whole team leaning in on this. And, obviously there's a lot of nuances, a lot of information here, but we're working together as a team, as a unit to try to provide you all with good information, good context for the conversation here. So I think with that, Cody will advance the slide, and we are right on time with our agenda. Whoops. So I think this is going to be for after the discussion. This will be Cindy's presentation. But I think what we'd like to do is open it up for the advisor group for any comments or questions, suggestions, thoughts that you might have since we last gathered. So floor is open. And you can raise your hand or unmute yourself, or I think actually Cody may have to unmute you if you raise your hand. I think that's how it works. But Cody, is that true? Do they need to raise their hand, or can they just unmute and jump on the line?
Folks are able to unmute themselves, so you can just get what will.
Perfect. All right.
This is Sunshine at Piedmont Housing Alliance. Just one quick question. What I'm seeing there in the energy code changes, I presume generally applies to single family context, less multifamily, correct?
Sunshine, I'm sorry. I think we kind of jumped ahead on that. So Cindy's going to give a presentation on the 2018 code changes, but I believe these are all residential. This is any building that the residential portion of the code applies to. I wanted to bring Cindy in and get an update on the energy code provisions, because I thought it would be helpful for kind of baselining a discussion around the affordable and special needs housing program. But I was hoping that we could kind of hold off on questions there until after Cindy's presentation.
No problem. Sorry about jumping ahead.
Okay. All right.
So Dan, can we go back to the last slide so that we're all focused on what we're
great idea. Thank
discussing?
You. Yep. Duan, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I did. Thanks.
Okay.
Yeah. So, question on the income guidelines. This is probably to Willie. Can you talk a little bit about the impact of the flexibility of the income thresholds to capture a greater number of people by, essentially, if the greater than of the two different guidelines than that you use to try to reach a number of people, and has that had a negative inverse effect on reaching the poorer of those at the end of that spectrum?
So if I think I'm understanding your question, so I wish I don't have the numbers in front of me in terms of eligible households, under the 6% or the 2% poverty or the 6% AMI, but I can speak anecdotally from our feedback from our network, and one of the key components has, as you can imagine, with so many programs, is typically driven by funding availability. And so that's a huge impact. Now, what I will say though is what we've probably, I can attest to, I think maybe in the past 5 to 8 years, is we've been able to serve a larger population that had previously become restricted, not specifically because of the income targeting, but because of the availability, the available housing stock, the eligible housing stock. So that's part of what we've been talking a lot about with this whole issue of deferrals. the backlog of our ability, because with the network, they go out now, they, pre-qualify the family over the telephone, they go out, they do the assessment. They don't actually pull them into the program until they've been able to go out, inspect the property, and determine the necessary measures. And so what we've seen is the expansion of the AMI to the SMI, I'm sorry, has really given a benefit, because we found ourselves finding, as you can probably imagine, a lot of our lower income individuals where we're visiting home, their homes weren't necessarily in the best condition. And so having to assess some of the things that needed to happen to the home actually, increased the numbers that were having to be deferred until we could find other resources to go in and do kind of minor repairs and those kind of things. So I'm not sure I'm 100% answer your question, but certainly if I'm not, let me know.
Yeah, it's helpful. Thanks.
Okay, and I'll add to that. I think we, I don't want to misspeak for staff, but we may have some documentation on what the eligible pool looks like at the 200% poverty as opposed to the 60% SMI. That could be something I could try and pull together.
Yeah, that I would, if you have available, that I'd love to see that.
I'll check with staff on that.
This is Jenica. I'd like to make one other comment. Willie, correct me if I'm wrong, but tying weatherization funds to the 60% versus poverty, Department of Social Services and using LIHEAP monies for fuel assistance, the idea was to make sure that we're weatherizing families' homes that are getting fuel assistance to basically bring those energy savings to those families, lowering the burden on the LIHEAP program around paying utility bills. So that's another reason to make sure those two programs synced up versus just the straight poverty numbers. And I would say from a practitioner level, we informally prioritize lower income families anyway. And it's not my sense that the program is so oversubscribed on eligible families that we're taking away from the ability of lower income families from receiving the service because of the way the priority list works. So I think that gets at your question a little bit. The difference between $10,000 on the lower end, but you could see as it gets more in the family, the 60% in the poverty numbers kind of equalize a little bit.
That's correct. That's correct.
Okay, I think I saw Nate Benferato's hand up.
Yeah, thank you. I come at this from more experience on sort of the energy efficiency side, particularly from utility programs. So I'm learning more about the housing elements and these low income funding sources. I'm curious. So I say that just to preface that my question might be a little bit basic, but I'm just curious about the geographic distribution that you guys have experienced, really comparing the affordable and special needs housing funding and WAP funding. So kind of curious as to how that, obviously it's going to be dependent on providers and who's making proposals and requesting funds, but I'm just curious how it sort of played out in terms of covering the Commonwealth. Are there differences between the two, or are they fairly evenly spread out?
So I'll try and speak to, on the weatherization component up front. So the weatherization program is delivered statewide. We currently have a network of 17 providers who serve the state. At one point, in fact, we were having this conversation yesterday. At one point, our provider network was up to about, we had about 22 agencies, but again, it's, these are fluctuated in funding capacity and all these other things. But at this point, there is statewide coverage. our higher capacity organizations have a larger coverage area, but every city and county is served by the current weatherization assistance program. Now, the affordable and special needs piece of this is a little bit more unique, and I'll tell you in a couple of components. So with that particular program, we typically respond to community level needs. So as you can imagine, in that capacity, it's if a community determines that there's a need for additional affordable housing, they pull together a proposal, and then we work with them to get the funding in place to make that happen. And so, as you can probably imagine, in some of your faster growing areas, that's where the larger number of our proposals are going to come in from. But the program is administered statewide. One of the things, and you may recall this from the very first presentation, with the federal home program, is the only source of funding under the broad spectrum of affordable special needs that we have what we call an additional requirement for an entitlement jurisdiction. And that an entitlement jurisdiction is a locality that is large enough by population that locality can apply directly to HUD for its own allocation of home funds. And so, as you can probably imagine, over the years, we had a lot of feedback from smaller localities who would contact us and say, wait a minute, if Arlington or the city of Richmond can get home funds directly from HUD, why would you all also invest in your funds in that region? And so we went through an analysis, and we kind of help folks understand we're a statewide organization. One of the ways we addressed that was we said that if a developer or a unit of local government wants to put forth a project in an entitlement jurisdiction, they have to have at least a 25% match of whatever funds they request from the state to, and they have to show that as part of the application. And that can be done in a number of different ways. We gave them flexibility. It can be a catch match. It has to be locally controlled resources. So it could be things like, waiver of fees, those types of things. But in DHCD's mission and role as a statewide organization, we know that the issue of affordable housing is statewide. What we've tried to do is level the playing field for some smaller localities that don't have a lot of local resources, where they can get, at least through the home program, they can get funding for their project and not have to meet any additional requirements. But, we can't, in our opinion, shut off, just because you're in Arlington, where, the project may be an $80 million project as opposed to a $8 million project in a small locality. So that's I'm hoping I'm answering your question, but all of the programs that we're talking about administering are in fact statewide available. But as you can imagine, with the larger projects, then they have larger requirements for the LIHTC subsidies and all the other resources that kind of come along with that. So.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
Sure.
This is Chelsea. Building upon that, Willie, can you talk a little bit about each of these four different programs? I'm going back in my notes and I see that they're gap subsidy financing for affordable housing, but how are they different? Like, what exactly do they do? Are any of them new construction? Are they retrofits, renovations? When you say that it's community level based need, does that mean all four of them are it's funding at the locality level? That's who you work with. Who is your partner? And I guess who is receiving this money?
Okay, so under the affordable and special needs, it is open to both for-profit and nonprofit developers. So that was a distinction that I think was made years ago. I mean, obviously, again, because of that that need, identifying the local need, and the fact that we know that not all localities are going to have the resources to kind of bring to the table. And we know in the development world, a lot of times the community, the unit of local government or whatever, they've identified a need, but they don't have the resources, so they'll put out an RFP or something like that. So in general, the program is open to both for-profit and nonprofit developers, and also units of local government. We have a number of projects that we partnered with, for example, through the housing authorities, and that's you all are, I'm sure, probably keenly aware that there's a move not only statewide but nationwide to redevelop the nation's public housing stock. And so even in those situations, a number of changes that have been made at the federal level, like the RAD, which is the Rental Assistance Demonstration Program, without going too deep into the weeds, it's a way to incentivize that redevelopment to happen and not put the burden on public resources, but to attract private resources, which sometimes means, private for-profit and nonprofit developers. And make sure, Chelsea, if you can repeat, I want to make sure I'm covering all the things you had wanted me to address there.
Yeah, no, that was helpful. So is this focused on new construction, or is this
okay
renovations and retrofits as well?
So yeah, so the program has not made a distinction. The existing affordable special needs housing program does not make a distinction between new construction and a renovation or retrofit. One of the things we do is, of course, we require, and I bring that out only because, again, depending on the community, we have a number of communities in Virginia where you have a lot of older housing stock and a fair amount of it historic, and we know that there's some challenges that come with rehabbing historic projects. There are limitations on what you can do with them. You can't turn them down. So we kind of gear the funding to the specific project, but there is no restriction on whether it's new construction or rehab or retrofit. I think one of the things that we've talked about, and Dan probably has already covered this, is the idea of a subgroup to kind of talk through, I think, that component, because the issue of energy savings, and then broader things like greenhouse gas emission reduction, carbon reductions, we know are going to those are going to vary, and the ability to impact are going to vary between new construction and rehab. And so that's one of the things that we had talked about, having the subgroup really kind of hammer down on and figure out how where's that demarcation of how we invest these resources, using these program structures, and perhaps one set of standards for new construction, maybe another set for rehab or retrofit.
That's all really helpful. Thank you. One last question. Are all of these, so if it's related to new construction, are they built to code, or are they built above code with some type of green building certification like Earthcraft or LEED?
So that is a scoring criteria. So as a reminder, this affordable special needs housing program is competitive. For example, in the last round, we received 45 applications. We have kind of combed through those. We're waiting to make some recommendations, but you're probably going to see a recommendation that we have funding available to fund about a third of those projects. So it is competitive. But the other piece of that, again, going back to the nature of the local level of some of these projects, some of them because of I'll be, again, anecdotal. Again, it's probably, when you look at the total pool, about 85 to 90% of those projects are, because of the competitive nature, are going to be able to meet that third-party standard. But again, there's a reality. We know that when you go to the historic community and they want to kind of retrofit, an old hotel or an old historic home, that they have some difficulty in doing some of that.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry, Jonica.
I just wanted to make a comment that I know we're not talking about the weatherization program, but I just wanted to say that new construction is not an eligible home under the weatherization program. And the reason being, it's not occupied. It may be designated for, or even if it was a for sale property that had someone that had already purchased it, it has to be occupied. So correct. That differentiates it from the affordable program.
Thanks, Jonica. And this is Sunshine. And just to say, Chelsea, to your point, the question of sort of setting a potential baseline for what projects, whether new construction or rehab under the AS&H program, would be eligible potentially, is the kind of the meat of the conversation that the subgroup is going to focus in on, because it's a potential moving target, and one that's related to both the minimum requirements, but also then the likelihood that Willie referred to, which is that most projects will pursue some third-party certification in any case. So how do we ensure that we are still being thoughtful about the additionality question?
Okay. Other thoughts from advisory group members that we have not heard from at this point? All right. Well, so what is the will of the body? Would this be a good time to invite Cindy to jump on here and walk us through the code changes? We're a little bit ahead of schedule, but it's certainly relevant and I think a good segue to the conversation we were just having. And hearing no objections, why don't we go ahead and do that? So Cindy. Good morning.
Good morning, Dan. Thank you. Good morning to everyone on the call. Just a couple of quick slides to give you an update on what has occurred in Virginia recently. If you haven't been part of the process, DHCD just did complete the update to the 2018 Virginia codes. And as you may or may not be aware of, the Virginia codes are based primarily on the model codes developed by the International Code Council, or ICC. So Virginia's energy codes use that as a starting block and then amend as appropriate for Virginia. Again, I'd like to give a shout out to those of you that have participated in this process. Chelsea, Casey, and some others, you all know that it's a herding of cats process to try and get all the stakeholders on board. So thank you for your participation in that, first of all. But just to give you some highlights on what just was approved by the DHCD Board of Housing and Community Development for the 2018 Virginia Energy Codes. Blower door testing is now mandatory. It removes the visual option for verifying building envelope air tightness. We did maintain the 5 air changes per hour. For those of you that have been following this for a while, you know, it had been 7, then it went to 3. Virginia amended it to 5. So that's where we are right now currently. The ceiling insulation had been R38, and that had been updated, I think, in the 2012. Virginia had amended it to stay at R38 instead of going to R49. In the 2018, that ceiling insulation requirement has been increased from R38 to R49. The res check compliance option had a workaround to incorporate Virginia amendments for a lower score to get a passing score with res check. Now, if you use res check as a compliance path for energy, there are no workarounds. You have to comply with the full 2018 requirements throughout. And then finally, there's a permanent certificate required to be provided for all new construction that indicates the R values of the insulation installed, the U factors and solar heat gain coefficient of the fenestration, the results of the duct system and building envelope air leakage testing that has been performed, the types and efficiencies of heating, cooling, and water equipment in the dwelling, and whether or not there is a gas-fired or unvented room heater, electric furnace, or baseboard electric heater installed, but the efficiency is not indicated for these. I do want to just take a moment and give a shout out to Veridient for the work that they have done over the last couple of years. It has helped us tremendously in developing and having conversations about the needs across the state. They did a field study, and that field study provided the information that showed a 74% failure rate on the duct systems, which helped us to move forward with the duct testing requirement. There was only a 22% failure rate on the envelope tightness, but that will be resolved now with the blower door requirement. And so we are making some incremental progress here. I would also like to thank them for all of the resources that they have provided for our building departments across the state. It is, you can develop and adopt all the codes you want to, but if they're not enforced, they're not doing you much good. And so education and training is a key part of making sure that that happens. And so the resources that Veridiant has developed to help train local building departments, again, based on their circuit rider work that they had developed with a number of localities in Virginia that agreed to work with them to do that. These will be amazing resources for building departments throughout Virginia. So again, just a quick shout out for that and those resources. So the next steps in Virginia, those codes that were approved by the Board of Housing in December are awaiting approval from the governor. Once we receive that, they will be published in the Virginia Register, and likely that will occur in March or April. The date for that 2018 codes to be effective is yet to be determined, but probably the earliest would be July 1st, and then depending on how much waiting we have to do to in the approval process and in the public comments, it could be as late as September. But then we will probably be starting the updates to the 2021 Energy Code almost immediately after the effective date of that, depending on when the Board of Housing approves the NORA or the Notice of Intended Regulatory Action. So that concludes what has been done on the Energy Code side in Virginia recently. And I'll entertain any questions that anybody has.
Cindy, this is Dan. I'm going to see if I can get the slide for us so that will cover the items that you just discussed, which is the next steps and timeline. There we go. Yeah. All right.
Oh, so, okay, sorry. I didn't see that slide had not advanced. I'm on my own PowerPoint presentation here, so.
Yeah.
So do you want me to go over that again then?
I think that would be helpful just so folks can link up, what you were saying with the slides.
Okay, sure. So the next steps are that the regulations that were approved by the board in December are awaiting approval from the governor's office. Once we receive that, those regulations will be published in the Virginia Register. We anticipate that will occur in March or April. So the date for the 2018s, an effective date, it's yet to be determined, but we're tentatively planning for the earliest would probably be July 1st, depending on when we get approvals back and the publication happens and the public comment period is over. And we get the other part of that is that we need to get custom codes published by ICC that includes Virginia amendments. So again, sometime between July and August, we'll probably have an effective date, and then the update to the 2021 energy codes will probably begin almost immediately, depending on when the board approves the NORA or the Notice of Intended Regulatory Action. I should note that the DHCD Building and Fire Regulations team did a sort of an overview of the energy efficiency in Virginia over the last several code cycles. And I don't know if it would be helpful for you all or not. I think I had sent it to Dan and he has it. It kind of shows the progression of energy efficiency requirements in Virginia. Basically, the only two areas that Virginia is still behind the National Model Energy Code is wall insulation and air changes. I think everything else is compliant with the model code, and I suspect we will be making progress into that during the 2021 code update process. You know, interestingly, and I don't know that I've heard this discussed as a possible benchmark, but and the codes really haven't addressed this yet. And that is the difference between energy efficiency and the embodiment of carbon in materials. So there, you know, those of you that are familiar on the energy side, I'm sure you know that there's great debate on the national level about the materials used for energy improvement and the amount of carbon they actually generate in manufacturing those. Some are, you know, have a 10 or 20 year payback because of the amount of carbon it takes to manufacture the insulation materials. So those type of restrictions are not in any of the energy codes in Virginia. So I don't know if you all are looking at that as a benchmark for the RGGI funds to limit the amount of greenhouse gases that a product uses. But I just wanted to throw that out there that it's not in the codes yet, but I suspect eventually it's coming just because there's so much debate about it.
Yeah, that's a great point. We're certainly following, at least Cindy's team is following the developments with regard to you know, wood, like cross-laminated timber construction. So there's a movement to start building larger and mid to high-rise buildings using cross-laminated timber in lieu of steel and concrete, precisely for that reason, because it lowers the it lowers the carbon that's emitted in the process of making the materials. And in fact, the trees at a certain age, you know, they stop uptaking carbon, and they are a way to embody or embed carbon without releasing it. So there's going to be a lot of interesting developments in the code in an ICC process over the next few years. So while we have Cindy, any questions, comments from the advisory group? Well, Cindy, let me just queue up a question for you. I think it might be relevant and helpful to folks with regard to new construction versus retrofit or renovation. Where's the dividing line between what projects are required to comply with the new construction code versus the existing building code?
So very simply put, any new construction, including additions, have to comply with the current construction code of the USBC. Any work, renovations, alterations on existing buildings, all of that falls under the Virginia Existing Buildings Code. And we have tried to, and you know, it'd be remiss if I didn't say thank you to Kenny Payne from Virginia AIA, who has been instrumental in trying to make this as easy as possible for stakeholders in Virginia. Everything related to existing buildings in the construction code has been moved over to the Virginia Existing Building Code. And that includes all of the energy provisions that apply to existing buildings, to the extent that you have to comply with different values and levels. It depends on the extent of the work being done on a building, the change of use, etc. So it varies. I don't know if that answered your question or not.
Yeah, so it varies, and it depends on, you know, what the scope of the work that's being done to an existing building is.
That's right.
Yeah. And then just to Cindy's point, I provided the advisory group with the document that her team put together, which was sort of that chronology of changes to the energy code over the last few years. So I think it's it's very detailed and it's very clear how there has been significant progress made in the 2018 cycle in bringing Virginia's code up to or very close to what the national code is, with the 2018 IECC International Energy Conservation Code is. So there's been significant progress and still more work to do. And part of the opportunity, the benefit that we have as a group, to use these HIEE funds is to provide some incentives for above code energy performance. And so that's what the affordable and special needs, the working group will be sort of delving into. And then we'll come back and summarize that information for everybody in late February. So Cindy, thank you again. Appreciate your being
Thank
here.
you, Dan, for the opportunity to share this information. And Building and Fire Regs team is happy to provide any help that you might need as you develop these processes.
Excellent. All right. Well, with that, I think we'll see if there are any public comments. Is there anyone on the line? You can use the chat and just, if you want to let us know, I think you can take a couple minutes if you have any thoughts you'd like to share. Again, this is an opportunity for the advisory group to hear from you all and for DHCD to hear from you all. So we'll just give it a minute. And like I said, I didn't hear from anybody that they wanted to jump on, but I want to make sure that everybody has a chance to be heard. So. All right. So hearing none. Susan from Charlottesville. Yes, you may. I just think you can unmute yourself, Susan, if I'm not mistaken. Or maybe Cody has to do that for you.
Are you able to hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay, excellent. Sorry about that.
Yeah, no problem.
I wasn't able to attend the last meeting, but I did watch the recording, and I wanted to thank the group for speaking, discussing about the comments I provided at the meeting before that one, about whether or not there could be some sort of allocation or pathway for localities to be able to work with DHCD to access funding to then pair with our local affordable housing programs. I wasn't at the last meeting, but I did want to say thank you for that consideration, and just to voice that as this whole program is getting started out, I know it's pretty complex. And I think what was discussed last time was to revisit the issue not for this first funding allocation, because there were just too many details to sort out in the timeline, but to look ahead at future ones. I wanted to say that Charlottesville is very willing to kind of share what our experiences are, what kind of a setup or process we think could be most beneficial and align most easily with our local resources. And we're, willing to be part of the conversation and, provide information or context as best as we can to inform the group and future decisions.
Yeah, thank you, Susan. I think I will say that we, nothing is carved in stone at this point in time. I think the three proposed funding buckets that we've put forward, of those three, the Housing Innovations Partnership Grants was something, at least in terms of the internal conversations we've had at DHCD, was a possible pathway that we thought could provide an opportunity for localities to, work with us. So we will, and possibly going forward, Susan, if you or other local government representatives would like to provide some input on that or provide some feedback on that proposal, I think that would be super helpful. Because we are looking for ideas, and I think we have a few, but I think to get a fuller picture, it would be helpful to have you more engaged in that discussion.
Excellent. Happy to be part of that.
Okay, all right. Anybody else from DHCD want to respond or weigh in at this point? No. Okay. All right. Well, we are. Let's see. Did we have anybody that we that wanted to jump on and say anything before we move along here? I don't see any hands up. So that really sort of takes us to what I was hoping to do with the last part of the last portion of the meeting was make sure that everyone has had a chance to provide comments, suggestions, etc., and then see if we could come up with maybe a summary or a series of recommendations that the advisory group could sort of put together, not necessarily formally vote on, but if we could get folks to sort of discuss and weigh in terms of what priorities and recommendations you all would like to have us take away from this and potentially put forward and fold into the package that we're putting together to be considered by the governor's office and SOCT's office. So, and also encourage advisory members who've not spoken up yet to jump in and provide your perspective and help round out the conversation. So.
Hey, Dan, can I jump in here?
Yep.
Yep, okay. I think Viridian's just pleased that DHCD is going through this process, and I think really taking a look at the various mechanisms to incentivize and deliver energy efficient, affordable housing to the Commonwealth. I know that Sunshine has suggested the ad hoc or the sub work groups, and I think that's a great idea. We're happy to share our experience and the data that we have on the 30,000 multifamily dwelling units, which are predominantly through the LIHTC housing program. We do have energy analysis on those. And again, we're just happy to share that information and hope that it would be helpful. The other point that Cindy did mention was the resources available for the residential energy code. That work is just being wrapped up currently, and those resources should be live to the jurisdictions across the state of Virginia here in the next week or so. They're going to production. So those types of resources are really for building code officials, aimed to improve the implementation of the Virginia Residential Energy Code. Those include checklists, best practices, and tips and tricks. There's about nearly 30 resources, I believe, in that regard. So those are just the two pieces I thought I'd offer for consideration.
Thanks, Casey. I saw Adam and Dewan in that order.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity today and really enjoyed hearing from the Building Council. I was unaware that they track the metrics of what it takes to carbon going into the products that are used in all the apartment communities that I've built out there. So very interesting. On that facet and just thinking bigger picture about the opportunity that we all have to think of the allocation of these greenhouse gas funds, I felt it was very important that we respect the source of the funds, and in that space, I think it was alluded to a little bit that we look at programs and different technologies that are out there that capture the renewable technologies, and in that space reduce greenhouse emission. And not to say we'd be shooting ourselves in the foot as the program is generated by greenhouse gas emissions, but I think it would be service to the program itself and respect the funding source.
Excellent. Thanks, Adam. Yep. Great suggestion.
I'm sorry, Dan, can I ask Adam to clarify what he means? Just because I want to make sure I understand. This is Chelsea and Virginia Energy Efficiency Council. You mentioned renewable energy.
Yes.
Some folks, so did you specifically mean solar, or were you talking energy efficiency?
Oh, so in the renewables energy front, you know, myself as an owner developer of apartment communities, I've tried a lot of different ones. So it could be solar, it could be geothermal. I don't think we're going to be putting wind turbines on apartment communities anytime soon, but, you know, I do think there's a wealth of, you know, technologies, and really in the geothermal space, I have seen bring tremendous savings to the residents of our apartment communities that capture that technology. And if properly incentivized, solar could work very well in the Commonwealth as it does in some of the surrounding jurisdictions. So those two technologies, I think, could go a long way, but there's a whole wealth of renewable energy sources and products that could really work within the housing space.
Yeah, just to that point, I think just, you know, this money is specifically going to low income energy efficiency. And so I think looking outside of that scope at renewables really does not go with what the law wants us to look at. We're specifically looking at energy efficiency for these funds.
All right. Well, let's put a pin in that and then move along to Dewan and then Casey.
Sure. Thanks, Dan, and thanks everyone. Dan, I'm peeking ahead in in looking at the agenda for the next meeting, and I have some questions there. So, and correct me if I'm wrong. So, what it appears that the next meeting, it says that you all will draft some percentage allocations, and then we can respond to that. I just want to make a comment and a suggestion. It seemed that there was a very robust discussion amongst the advisory council members at the last meeting regarding those percentage allocations, and we didn't really come to much of a finality or conclusion. And so I would hope for, you know, some like another discussion or some more opportunities for discussions amongst ourselves and an opportunity for feedback, you know, while you are drafting, or to guide you in that first draft, and then we can respond to it again. Because I just think we had a lot of good discussions on what the percentage allocation should be, and then even if we break into different work groups to discuss different programs, there's still uncertainties on, you know, what potential programs there are before we get to that refining the allocation bucket. So it just appears to me there's a lot of more input, and I know that I was one of them that gave some general advice and didn't come to any conclusions either. That would help you, but I just think there's a lot more discussion to be had there before we really move down the road of finalizing the allocation. So that's just a quick comment that I want to make.
Yeah, I think that's a great comment, Dewan. And I think, you know, as you probably gathered from the meeting on January 13th, we didn't put any specific percentage allocations in there. We were more wanting to get the advisory group's response to those three proposed buckets, you know, because we could have had a conversation with you all on the 13th that would have been something like, well, you know, we think there should be 4 or 5 other buckets, you know, and then that changes the conversation about percentage allocations. So we were hoping to focus in, I know it sounds simplistic, but we were hoping to focus in on, you know, getting general agreement that these are the priority areas. And then we can kind of move forward with saying, based on the percentages, you know, how would we allocate amongst those 3 buckets? But we are certainly, DHCD is certainly open to having, you know, more feedback loops with regard to these proposed suggestions. So if you have anything, you know, if it would be something where you'd like to have a couple weeks to review a proposal before we gather again together in late February, we can do that for you. Okay. All right. Okay. Perfect. Got it. You got it. Okay, Casey and then Adam.
Thanks, guys. I just wanted to circle back a little bit on Chelsea and Adam's comments there. Chelsea, I absolutely appreciate you making sure that we focus on the directive of the legislation, but also just wanted to piggyback a little bit on Adam, and I think some on Cindy about the direction of the industry as it relates to energy efficiency in buildings. Looking at the Department of Energy, they are looking to scale some advanced technologies, some being, maybe not so advanced, such as mini splits, but also looking at EV and battery storage, and how are those going to become scalable, and this interconnectivity of energy efficient buildings and utilities. So as our industry continues to progress, I do think that looking at the horizon, similar to what Cindy said about the embodied carbon in manufacturing, I think it's just will be important for us to keep that kind of line of sight in mind for perhaps future years. Thank you.
Thanks, Casey. Adam? Did you, I thought I saw your hand.
Yeah, it was up from before. I'm sorry, I didn't lower it.
All right. Did you have anything else you wanted to jump back in on that, or?
No, not at the moment. I'm enjoying the discussion. Thank you.
All right. All right. So other folks that we have not heard from yet, your thoughts and feedback, questions? All right, well.
Sorry, Dan, I guess I have another one,
yes,
if I can jump in real quick. So another suggestion. So I know that just in some conversations that I've had, there's several people who aren't a part officially of this advisory council or whatever it's called, advisory group, that is very interested in the topic, who maybe can't join at whenever we have our meetings to provide public comments. So I'm wondering one of two things: if we can think about broadening this pool of people and inviting more people to be official members of the group, even if they can't make it, and then two, maybe capturing some sort of feedback on your website, like a comment box or something that if people wanted to submit some sort of written thoughts or comments, that they can easily do so without knowing to I can email Dan Farrow whenever I'd like to, but just something official that makes it easy to accept some additional feedback from others.
Yes, I think the comment box is probably something we could do pretty easily. And then certainly any feedback, written or verbal, my door is always open. I'm available to meet with folks one-on-one.
Did your screen freeze up, Davon?
I think Daniel's screen freeze.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, it's kind of interesting. For mine, everybody's camera went off, and I could only see like one or two people. They can't hear anything. With all the trouble I had this morning, I was thinking it was me. Given what's happening, I'm not so sure. So.
No, I can still see everyone except for
Okay.
Dan is frozen.
Okay. Yeah, we may have lost our main connection. Maybe I'll see if Cody is.
think Dan just left. He's going to try to get back on.
Okay.
Did we have any other members of our stakeholder advisory group that had any comments?
This is Sunshine. I would just say that I think we're going to be probably be ready to have a more robust conversation once the subgroups come back with some solid proposals to start to chew on and tweak and edit.
Agreed. Agreed. So, Kristen, I'm wondering if we should.
Well, I think I saw Adam's hand up one more time. Did you have it up?
I do have a question. Not that I'm trying to kill time or anything. A question for Willie on you had made an earlier note, and I believe all the affordable special housing programs have been layered on the LIHTC. Have you seen any properties with income averaging from LIHTC come through the program that allow up to 80% of AMI?
So yeah, you were kind of breaking up, but I heard income averaging, so I think I know where your question.
Yes.
Are you able to hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, so we've done, I think, about 3 projects, and it was quite an exercise for us, being our first time around. So yeah, we've done 3. For us, it has been kind of more on the working with our partners at Virginia Housing on the legal side. I think that the underwriting piece is making a lot more sense to me now.
Okay.
But yeah, so far we've I think it's been 3.
Okay.
Yeah. So now I think the only screen I see now is just you, Adam. So it seems like Nancy. So
Well, this is Sunshine. I guess perhaps to quote unquote kill a little time on a related topic, Adam, and maybe that takes a little bit of pressure off of the question around renewables. I do know that as we approach the commentary on the next year of LIHTC, that the question of integrating solar as a point criteria separate from this set of funds, but just integrating into the QAP is on the table and will be discussed, either in February or March when we have our first round discussion next year. So I think that relieves some of the pressure of the idea of using these funds for renewables, because I think just to support what was said previously, it has to focus on energy efficiency. But I do think there are going to be other avenues for supporting renewables coming down the pipeline, ideally.
And I meant to clarify that, Sunshine, thank you, that I think just thinking through the infrastructure will be important.
Hi, folks. This is Dan. Can you hear me now?
Yep, Dan, we can hear you.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it sounded like I could hear that there was some good discussion going. So maybe the easiest thing for me to do is just sort of remove myself from the conversation. But I apologize for the technical difficulties here. I'm not able to get back into the video conference. I think given that we seem to be plagued by some technical issues this morning, I wanted to see if I could summarize briefly what I took away from the conversation today. And I was in the process of responding to Dewan's comment regarding the advisory group. And I think that we would, as much as we want to make sure that everybody's heard and included, I think we would try to hold the line a little bit on adding more folks to the advisory group. But I can certainly, like I said, we can put a comment box in there. We can solicit comments from the distribution list that we have of folks who are interested in this program and are watching the development. So we'll go to the mat and make sure that we're, extending ourselves and really making sure that folks feel like they can provide comments. And I think the other thing that will be helpful, and I wanted to mention, is that as we sort of flesh out the funding buckets and the proposal, the proposed allocations of funding in terms of percentages, that will also give folks something to react to, because I think right now we're in a little bit of a conundrum in the sense that there isn't a lot for folks to react to yet. So I think as we get a little more flesh on the bones here, that will probably elicit some additional comments and feedback, and I think that will be helpful. It'll give folks a context and something to react to a little more fully. So, but to summarize where we are, I think we are. I will be sending out doodle polls for the HEDC and the Affordable and Special Needs Housing Work Group. We'll bring support in from either from DHCD staff or for the ASNH discussion. I think it would be probably advisable to have Virginia Housing representatives as part of that conversation, so that we can all be on the same page in terms of what how this conversation might impact the LIHTC program and what the timeline is, and for that process. And then I do have some information for the HADC group that Carrie Hearn from DMME put together, and that is an analysis based on the Department of Energy's LEAD tool that really breaks down energy burden down to both county and census tract level, which I think is also helpful in another lens and another framework, another layer by which we can look at this issue of how are we best serving historically disadvantaged communities. So I would say look for those doodle invites to the folks that have expressed interest in being part of those groups, and then we'll also be sending out another poll to schedule another full advisory group meeting in late February. And then I think also what we heard today is that folks would like some time to react prior to the meeting, so that you all would like to see a proposal in terms of the percentage allocations and have some opportunity to react to that or digest that a little bit before we reconvene in February. So let me stop there and see if anybody's on the line or anybody has questions or comments as far as that goes.
Dan, this is Nate Benferrato. Definitely makes sense to me, and certainly appreciate Dewan's suggestion to have a little time with the proposal before the next meeting. I think that'll be great, and thank you for being able to accommodate that. Thank you.
Of course. All right. Well, I think I don't want to interrupt that discussion that was happening, and I know Willie. I heard Willie responding to some questions there. So is there anything else that, for the good of the order, the group thinks that we should discuss today? I'm also trying to be sensitive to the fact that if we're nearing the conclusion that we give you back some time and let you get on with your day. So what's the will of the body?
I would move to adjourn.
Okay, Jonica, thank you. Do we have a second on that? Okay. All right. Excellent. Thanks, everyone, and we will be in touch again very, very soon. Thank you very much for your time.
Sure thing. Thanks, everybody.
Okay.
Thank
Thank
you.